Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode from Defense Disrupted. I'm Ian. I work with this little company called Turbine One, and I'm honored to be joined today by a teammate, Trevor Hough. Trevor has an extraordinary career, many years in service, which we'll get into. I thought I knew him as a gentleman and a military officer at the head of special operations units like the Joint Intel Brigade, and as a special advisor on the Middle East to previous Vice President Mike Pence. But it turns out this gentleman has a number of other things, which even though I've been working with him for just about a year, I didn't realize until this morning, to include some time that he spent at the Central Intelligence Agency, on the National Security Council, supporting activities in a Iraq invasion on the northern side up with the Kurds, providing a different perspective on that important but terrible conflict. And so with that extraordinary background, we're going to cover all sorts of fun topics today. I'm very excited about it, and it's an honor to be joined by Mr. Trevor Hough. Welcome, sir. How you doing?
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time. And I appreciate this venue for not just veterans, but people in the defense industry broadly to tell our stories. I think it's impactful. I think it's helpful, hopefully, for somebody younger who is thinking about doing this for a career, or even people nowadays who are out in the industry, and a chance for them to learn a little bit from peers and folks who've served with them. So I appreciate it greatly.
Man, this is gonna be fun. I got so many questions for you. All right, and I'm also got some surprises along the way. We're gonna get political. We're gonna get personal. We're gonna get tactical. I'm gonna hit you up front with just a weird question that I think folks that know you would be eager to get your perspective on. So you know a little bit about Iran and the geopolitical conflicts there. There was a recent American effort that led to some bombs being dropped on a special mountain to have an impact on the nuclear activities of that nation. I'm not going to ask you about whether it worked or it didn't. I want to talk about the technology that was employed in that effort. So as far as I know, it was a very special airplane with launch from far away with very special missiles, neither of which were manufactured by a startup. They were made by the traditional players in the defense industrial complex, you pick your large primes, your Lockheed Martins, your Northrop Grummons, folks like that. But you, sir, have chosen to work for a startup, a tech company. I don't think, again, as far as I know personally, any VC-backed Silicon Valley tech were involved in that strike in an area that you know very well. So the question, sir, is, I don't even know if it's true, and I can just assume it is for this question. Why is it that you choose to work then every day for a novel, disruptive startup rather than some of those big primes that were involved in a strike like that in a part of the world that you're an expert in?
I think when I look at the way that the U.S. and our allies, but specifically U.S. for this answer, compete well against the Chinas, against the Russias, the Irans in this particular instance, the primes have a place. They build exquisite, very expensive hardware to do certain things. And I don't think you're going to displace, I don't think you're going to see a startup building tanks or exquisite long-range bombers, right? Like that's not where startups are best focused. But when I think about the way we compete best, it's the marriage of private capital with smart startup technology and bringing those two together to do things that the primes just aren't able to do. And so when I see an opportunity with a company like Turbine One to change the way that warfighters analyze data on the battlefield and make sense of it faster, that is something that startups are exquisitely built to do. Talk about to use that word. So you marry up that capital with a young company that has a great idea and let them loose onto the proverbial battlefield, but also into leveraging the best of technology to support our warfighters. And that's why I'm with a startup as opposed to a prime.
You've led large bureaucracies and succeeded within them. So there can be entrepreneurs, there can be innovation within large organizations. Why is it then, broadly, this is more of a macro specific point, I'm not picking on any one company. Why is it then that those kinds of companies would not be able to deliver this type of disruption?
I think there's the way that they're incentivized doesn't work towards it. Certainly publicly traded companies oftentimes aren't able to take the risks, take the shots. They don't embrace, in Safi Bakal's book, Moonshots, the concept of breaking off a small portion of your company to do that kind of internal R&D, but be able to scale broadly across the company. At some point, you get so big where you're not able to do that anymore. And the verticals within those companies just don't communicate very well. They aren't able to share. There's the rice bowl syndrome that kicks in, where everybody's trying to protect their turf. All of those things work against moving fast, having a flat sort of leadership structure to enable you to quickly adapt to the realities of the battlefield and iterate rapidly with your product. Just doesn't happen in large companies and large bureaucracies.
Let's shift a little bit to how you built that perspective and opinion. So how many years in service were you? How many years in uniform?
Just under 30.
How'd you start? Where was your first job?
Yeah. First job was what the Army military occupational specialty is an 11 Charlie. I was an E2 or a private in the infantry as a mortarman. So for your listeners who maybe haven't had time in the military, indirect fire. So taking a tube, launching around down to up to a couple of miles away, and it's kept at the lowest level in terms of the infantry squad or a low kind of command and control structure in the military. So it's a very low level, super fun job. I was 19 years old, and it seems like yesterday.
What was your last job in service?
Last job in service, I was the deputy for counterterrorism in Near East at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and what they call their mission management directorate. So their efforts to work across the various silos inside of NGA or National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is the mission management directorate. So I had the lead there for counterterrorism in Near East. And prior to that, the last full 2-year job or 2-year assignment in the military, I commanded the Joint Special Operations Command's Intelligence Brigade.
Let's talk a little bit about counterterrorism then. That's relevant. And here we're going to get political. Don't worry, Trevor. It's okay. You'll be safe. You don't have to worry about it. But I'd say maybe it's more newsworthy, but it's going to feel political. So it's announced. News is out. All the trade pubs are talking about it. There's a new prioritization in national security for our nation. This administration has a new number one. And it is basically with different words to be defined later, but I'll call it Homeland Defense, borders, and counterterrorism. It's in that category. Now, so you've seen counterterrorism over a few decades. We don't know the details of the new strategy, but it is in the news. So looking back, we'll do a look back and now and going forward. So to look back, how did counterterrorism change in your times in service? You can share some reflections on it. We'll then look into, well, where are we now? And any crystal balls as to where things will go next. But let's start with the past. So when did you first start engaging with counterterrorism operations?
First time probably would have been right after 9/11 or on 9/11 specifically. I was with 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was in command of the military intelligence detachment, which had many of the intelligence assets for the Special Forces Group, some of which were Arabic linguists. And if you'd asked me on September 10th, I would have told you, get rid of the Arabic linguists as fast as possible. I do nothing with Arabic. I am focused at the time we were deploying into the Balkans, into places like Bosnia and Kosovo, and I needed Serbo-Croatian linguists or Albanian. I didn't need Arabic. That all changed on 9/11, and immediately a low density, very difficult to learn language like Arabic became very important. And that started my journey on counterterrorism. So really 9/11.
And how did you see it evolve, right? So my memory of those days, right? Chaotic, disruptive, people had the nerve to be surprised, some false starts, massive investments, and eventually there was sophistication, there was integration, there was data sharing. I mean, you've seen this from DoD and the agency and combat support agencies. So you can only imagine what your experience has been with the basics of data sharing over 20 years. I can imagine it was non-existent, painful, and then almost good. Is that too unfair?
No, it's not. To take the latter part of your question, I think when it comes to data sharing, like it became very personality based. Even in these large bureaucracies, if you knew somebody on the other end, you were working at one place and you knew somebody on the other end, they could open up those doors and work through the bureaucratic process to share information. There are still silos. There are still people who, for sometimes very good reasons, sometimes terrible reasons, wouldn't want to share. And that really, those times were very frustrating. I can think back on, you knew they had a piece of information, but they weren't willing to share it for a variety of different reasons. And I think when I look broadly at the evolution of it, we went from a very defensive posture to a very offensive posture. And there's metaphors of this playing the away game as opposed to the home game. And we went on the offensive and we went to a lot of different places throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, sometimes even in Europe or other places where we had to go and find the individuals who we assessed through good, solid intelligence work were going to target either our interests overseas or actually the homeland here in the United States. And so that was the biggest evolution, was going on the offensive as opposed to playing defense, which we had been for the previous really several decades.
So where are we now in terms of this counterterrorism dynamic strategy? It's a lot to just summarize. I think the folks that are probably listening to this podcast probably know what JADC2 is. They probably know what Project Maven is. And I think even, if that's a reference to the folks that care, I think we can go a little deeper into, like what's really going on right now. And obviously nothing of sensitive nature, but just from a broader level of, how is our nation investing in this? Is it a lot more than it used to be? Has it been there the whole time? Do we even have folks in, this is a question I actually know the answer to, but I think some folks would want to talk about it. Do we even have folks in Iraq right now? What are they doing? So like, how would you describe the situation today?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. The pendulum swing throughout history, and I think the pendulum swung a little bit back too far from the offensive operations that we were doing in places like the Middle East. You have to maintain one of the great challenges is if you don't maintain pressure on the network, pressure on the enemy network, you'll lose things like the collection and the intelligence that you're trying to get. And so the constant pressure is important to disrupt. If you know, and you really, you have a duty to do something about it. If you have information that they're planning something in a country like Syria, as an example, you have a duty to do something about it. And if you don't, then you'll deal with the consequences when they ultimately put that plan in operation. I think the difference is, without getting too political, the previous White House administration failed to address, I'm not going to talk about the why, but they failed to address the border security issue. And it ultimately cost them the election along with other issues. That border security issue is central as well to counterterrorism, because if you do not know fundamentally, no matter which side of the immigration debate you're on, if you don't know who's coming across your borders, you have no way of knowing what percentage is, probably a small percentage, but a percentage. If you're a terrorist, you're thinking this is the best thing ever. It's an uncontrolled border. I can get across. I pay people, either the Mexican or the Canadian borders. Both are kind of wide open. And so this administration has made a concerted effort to stop that. Obviously, that's public, and I think that's another key part to the counterterrorism operation. It's one thing to play away; it's another thing to secure more broadly secure the homeland. And I think we're seeing an increased investment. I think that's an evolution that we've seen only over the past really year or so.
Let's dive into this a little bit. So I heard a couple of elements in your brilliant response, and I'm sincere in that compliment, that I find both insightful and contradictory. For example, I love the away game, home game. I get it. And I think I get your main point that the counterterrorism fight is broadly seems to be shifting from an away game to a home game. I get it. And broadly, 9/11 was a home game terrorist attack. Okay, so I'm tracking, got the sequence. You also made the point, though, that if you don't go pressure on the network, they're going to come in or they're going to commit. And I guess that, there's like a question of, can you do it all? Can you afford it all? Maybe perhaps not, right? And then I think there's also a dynamic to explore between the intelligence of what's happening away and then the action of it, domestic, or the inversion of that. There's like kind of a quad chart I can see in my head of like, wait a second, if I know it's going to happen over there, but I'm over here, how do you influence it over there? Do you influence it here? If you're influencing it over here, is it already too late? Like I can see there's a strategic balance there in this very complicated chessboard. But just thinking through those elements, can I ask you to reflect a bit more into, is it a contradiction to put pressure abroad and then invest domestic, or is that just the only way to do it?
I think it's the only way to do it. And I think that the particular units or organizations who are built to do that. So your away game is going to be largely special operations, largely intelligence community, and our allies and partners. I mean, we rely extensively on really long-standing allies and partnerships throughout the world, especially in places like the Middle East and in Africa, where the terrorist threat has historically come from. I would contrast that with the domestic side, which is going to be largely law enforcement based. And then of late, conventional military forces, regular Army, regular Marine Corps, that kind of thing along the southern border, along with the CVP and all the various alphabet soups of agencies that are a part to that. But those are different organizations, different focused. And I think that allows you to do both. However, ultimately, you make a good point. It is a zero-sum game. The resources aren't unlimited, and it's a challenge to maintain pressure across various parts of the network all at once, which is why you see a dramatically reduced footprint in places like the Middle East. It's focused, it's laser sharp in terms of what's there to do, and same for the domestic law enforcement that's deployed along the places like the southern border and the military that's deployed down there too.
I've never heard that framing. It's insightful. I'm going to steal this later, quote you, I guess, but I'm going to try to say it as if I came up with this brilliant idea of the allocation of conventional forces and special forces. Part of, I think, what I'm guessing enables you to have that brilliant insight is that you've had a career as infantry, armor, heavy, intel, and special ops. Is that normal for people that have spent 20, 30 years in service? Is that a conventional path, or conventional? That's an accidental phrase. Is that how most soldiers work?
No, no. The Army, gave up on me at some point and said, essentially, "We don't know what the hell to do with you." I was blessed with opportunities that kept doors opened, and I took those opportunities without fail. I tried to anyways, and that led me to some amazing experiences and serving in units and with people who are true capital H heroes. We sometimes we will make sports figures or musicians, our heroes. And we do that, I think, a little bit at, I don't know, peril isn't this the right word, but it's the one that comes to mind. I think picking your heroes is something important to do. And I was able to serve with many incredible Americans and allies and partners throughout that journey. It wasn't a normal journey. I was cognizant at some point that it wasn't, but I was having too much fun and too many opportunities were being given to me that I would be foolish to step aside. I did it. I did it though with, at certain points, plenty of my Army mentors whispering in my ear that you're killing your career by doing this. And it was really an acceptance that I was called to the special operations and the missions that I thought at that stage in our nation's history were most important, and I tried to just lean into those as best as I could at the expense of doing a more traditional path.
You're going to hate this, Trevor. I'm going to call you a little bit of a hero because you're a little famous. And while the story has been covered elsewhere, I think it's a story worth repeating. If you're okay with it, I want to ask you about something that led to you being in some local news not too long ago. I believe there was a criminal who committed some terrible things and was on the run, and you somehow ran into this bad guy doing bad things. Can you share a little bit about how what story I'm alluding to? Can you give me an introduction as to what happened? How'd you first find this thing out? And maybe we would spend just a few minutes talking about how, and the point of this exploration is not to get into the details of an attack on other humans. I want to get into your call to service. There's an aspect of the story that I'm inspired by. I know the story, so I'm going to play dumb a little bit, but I'm going to pull it out of you. I'm going to play dumb because I think there's an aspect of your character that in an interesting time was called to a dangerous amount of service yet again, that you've been responding to the moment over and over again in your career. It is inspiring. I think it's a story worth retelling to perhaps a different audience that doesn't watch the local news. So what am I referring to here, Trevor? What happened a little while ago?
June 1st, 2023, my family and I, including our beagle, were driving back from a trip. We came up on a massive pileup of cars on an interstate about an hour north of here around Asheville, North Carolina, for your listeners who may have spent some time out there. Beautiful part of the country. What ended up happening, we didn't realize this at the time, was a criminal had caused the accidents by driving headlong into oncoming traffic while he was trying to evade a high-speed pursuit from law enforcement. He got out of his car, somehow still was walking, and proceeded to race towards my vehicle and the vehicle next to us. He ended up jumping through that passenger window of the vehicle next to us and assaulting a 71-year-old woman who was just trying to help him. In essence, didn't know what the situation was. And she called out for help. And I jumped out of the car and went over and helped her and was able to pull the attacker out of the car and subdue him on the ground. And ultimately, two other military veterans came up and helped as we subdued him and controlled the situation there until the police showed up and took him away. And at what time I learned, because they said, "Hey, you know who this was?" And I said, "No, I don't know who the hell it was." They said, "Well, he had robbed 5 or 6 banks in a community just to the east of where we were. So he was a wanted armed bank robber who had been evading the police for some time. And that's when I found out kind of the gravity of it. And obviously, as I was looking at this badly hurt 71-year-old woman, the gravity sunk in there too. And so I think a good lesson in sometimes you just have to help people. And I think without getting too philosophical, we tend to, in today's world, we get sucked into our phones, we get sucked into our computers. In my generation, it was sucked into your TV, right? And it makes it easy to forget about your neighbors and the people around you. And I think that as a society, that just isn't a good answer. And sometimes you just need to help people. Sometimes that's helping the proverbial elderly woman across the street. Sometimes it's just opening a door for somebody. But in this particular instance, he had to act to save a woman's life because her life was in peril because of this criminal who recently, in a very tragic situation, escaped by killing one of his guards and escaped prison and ultimately was captured again, but that was only a couple of months ago. So there are very bad, very evil people in the world, and I think if good people don't step up and help, then evil wins. And I think that I'll stop there because I can get quite philosophical, but that's the story.
Thank you for sharing that very difficult story. I'm sure there's a lot to process there. It's an inspiring story. And so I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what I would call the micro moments of that story. I think I heard you say that this gentleman was armed when you were subduing him. Did you know that when you left your car?
No, I assumed you don't have a lot of time. I mean, it was, a matter of a second or two to get out of my car, make the decision, get out of my car, run across the highway. My wife's sitting there saying, "What the hell just happened?" The kids in the backseat watching Bluey, like everything's happening quite quickly. So I did not know if he was armed or not, but you sort of, as you're going into that situation, your mind's running a million miles an hour and you have to assume. I remember thinking, I didn't get a good look at the guy. So I had no idea, frankly, if he could have been, bigger than me, stronger than me, faster than all the things. He could have been, a lifelong practitioner of martial arts and I would have gotten my ass kicked. And like, there was a million things that could have happened. He ended up, I don't think he was armed ultimately when I got my hands on him. I think what happened was in the process of the car accident that he caused, the massive car pileup, he lost his weapon that he had. And I think he had it. And the reason I say that is during the process of subduing him, when I had him on the ground, he made a very uncomfortable movement to the lower part of his back that you wouldn't, while he was lying on his back, that you wouldn't make unless you thought you had a weapon.
So that's probably when it occurred to you, oh, maybe he has something here.
Yeah, that was it. And I had to explain the situation to him that if he produced a weapon, what it would mean ultimately for him in the situation. And he stopped movement at that point, not for public, ears, so to speak, in terms of what I said to him. But I think he thought he had a weapon. He was also, turns out he had been under the influence of drugs. So he, not thinking the clearest as at that point in time.
This is why I bring up that capital H hero word in this context. We were not in uniform at the time. You were driving your kids and the dog. And I'm sure there was, I can only imagine what it would have been like. And often with heroes, there's a question of what would I do in that situation? What would I have done if I'd seen it? Would I have helped? You mentioned another interesting micro moment. There were two other veterans who followed you. Maybe weren't the first on the scene, but were inspired by you in the action of then, you know what? He's gone. I'm going to go too. There's a lot of little moments in that story that are these decisions along the way that I think are incredibly motivating. And I think the nature of the word hero is some level of inspiration. It is a ready at the moment, called upon when you didn't know it, jumped into the opportunity. And it's something that is, I gotta say, just crazy, obviously. But also I'm very grateful that while it sounds like some real people were hurt initially and this bad individual did more terrible things later, tragically, awfully. I'm inspired that when given an opportunity to do a little something of value, you're the kind of person that has done that in that one moment, that one day. But frankly, it sounds like I'm assuming all throughout your career. So let's dig into a little bit in transition as to where those characteristics came from, and perhaps you mentioned some folks that were giving you advice that you're hurting your career. I have a hunch there are some folks that also are worth commending in terms of those that have supported your career and have been able to recognize other moments when you ran into the burning building, proverbially. So let's look back a little bit. Let's look into some of your mentors, or maybe you want to talk about the people that were awful. Any formal general officers that were criticizing you that you're like, you know what, I made it. I'm going to tell that guy he was wrong. Want to do that on the record?
May or may not be one of your board advisors.
Oh, we're gonna go there. Is he a friend of the pod? Has he been on the podcast before? Is he
Yeah.
good, like that? Oh my gosh! Well, that's well at this point it's actually a pretty large number. So there's diversity and safety in numbers there. I think you're safe. But yeah, as you look back, who are the folks that recognize that call to duty, call to service that you clearly have?
Yeah, I was alluding to Lieutenant General retired Bob Ashley, who tried to rectify my career by pulling me onto his staff when he was the senior intelligence officer for the Army G2 in Army speak. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm going to learn Army stuff, and I need to because I'm a half-assed Army officer at this point. And no sooner did he try to bring me in when I had to request a call from him and tell him I was just asked to interview to go to the office of the vice president at the White House. And to which, to Bob's credit, he said, hey, Trevor, you're not going to come to the Army staff. When calls come from the White House, we don't say no, you go. And he was wise enough to know that while that wasn't probably the best thing for my Army career, it was the best thing for our nation. And when called to go serve at that level, the opportunities are so exceedingly rare that you don't pass it up. So I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that opportunity and that door that he helped open really for me. And then lots of mentorships, Ian, throughout the years. The non-commissioned officer corps in our Army, in our military broadly, it is the differentiator for our Army and arguably many Western armies. It's the reason, one of the big reasons, in my opinion, that the Russian Army hasn't performed well in a place like Ukraine and is still stuck there, is because they don't have the non-commissioned officer corps that we have. And as a junior officer, I'm horrified to think of some of the decision making and sort of the leadership that I demonstrated, and it was fixed and by mentorship from strong NCOs over the years. But ultimately, the whole journey starts. I go back to being a young on air. I was a disc jockey, so I'm working at a radio station in my hometown, and the radio station's owned by a gentleman named Dennis. I remember coming off air. I had spent my freshman year at a college in Virginia, paying my own way through school, and I thought maybe I'll try this ROTC thing. Maybe the military is for me because at this point I had really no inkling. And I went in to see him. He said, "Okay, what's the plan? What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to apply for an ROTC scholarship, take a year off from college." And he knew in my small town, that was code for you're going to get whatever job you can, probably marry someone you went to high school with, and call it good. And he said, "Well, if you're thinking about the military, he had graduated from the nation's only really 4-year private military college in Norwich University in Vermont." He said, "Let's go check it out." And I did. And they made me a very generous offer in terms of they knew I was paying my own way through school, and they made me a financial aid package I couldn't refuse, so to speak, and I ended up going there. So he opened a door for me, and I stepped through, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I made a career out of service because of that one conversation, really, that took place in Lake Placid, New York, a long time ago.
So where did that this still a mystery to you, sir? I'm trying to figure this. I didn't know you were a disc jockey. I learned something new again on this podcast. I'm so glad I'm learning about you with everyone watching us. I wonder where that started, that reaction. It's there's a fight or flight aspect to it. I've seen it. Well, actually, I'll say it this way. So I'll share a personal story. So speaking of, marry your high school sweetheart, I may have done that. And my lovely wife has noticed that over, I don't know, 30 years of friendship, we have seen car accidents and people get hurt and random things. And in my personal life, I have veteran military friends, and of course, I have many that are not. And inevitably, when the escalator breaks or when this random thing happens, my wife she told me, "It's all you military people. You're the first one out there. I don't even know what's happening, and you guys are already on the scene." I'm like, "Wait, what happened?" And you guys are already hands in there. And whether it just been the coincidence of who we happen to be, I didn't notice that in my own life. And it never occurred to me that like it's driven by some way. It seems to be who we are. It's almost like a Rorschach test of some level of people who tend to have that characteristic, maybe choose this type of work. And by the way, I should also extend that to firefighters, paramedics, to some extent, in one case, teachers. Like there's a certain level of public service where some people just like get on it without thinking necessarily about, am I going to study this crisis for too long? They run in and then start to figure it out by solving it. And so I want to ask the question that's unanswerable. Like, what is it about us that comes from? There's guidance to get us into careers like this. As I have a similar story, I think, to, hey, give this a try. Okay. It wasn't like I was born, how was I going to go down that path? But once in it, maybe there's some aspect of why we keep coming back to it, why we think we're relevant. I don't know. Any reflections on the nudges that let you find that part of yourself?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think military service was not preordained. Certainly, I'm of the generation that was impacted heavily. My parents' generation was by Vietnam. So my little league coaches, the local police chief, relatives didn't have a good experience, didn't come home well, weren't treated well. And that now in hindsight, looking back, I can see how that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And some of them really not good. So military service was not like on the agenda to begin with. It just, happened. And so I think there are people who, through a bunch of different experiences, upbringing, become people who value service to others and being a part of something bigger than themselves and putting others before themselves. At some point that just happens. And it could happen through sports teams if you're into that. It could happen through the way you're brought up or in your church, but something in your upbringing wires you in to think of others and put them before you. And then obviously the military encourages the team aspect before individual. And I think that's really what it is. And even on a simplistic level, growing up, I grew up in Lake Placid, New York, which hosted the Winter Olympics twice, 1932 and 1980. And so the famous Miracle on Ice, the 1980 men's Olympic hockey team, which beats the Soviet team, which is probably the best hockey team that ever skated. I learned from a pretty young age, how did that happen? And the lessons quickly came out of teamwork and being a team. If you try to individually beat the Soviets, you will get your ass kicked out of 100 times. If you work together as a team, you might have an opportunity. And Herb Brooks, the coach of the team, drummed that into him. And so there were a lot of lessons and a lot of things through sports, through growing up that I think led to that for me personally. Broadly, though, I think it's somehow people are taught through experiences, through teaching, that others need to be put before yourself. And I hope we have more of that because we certainly need it in the world and in our nation.
Well, I feel lucky to be on a team with you now. I think we're working on some pretty extraordinary things. And so I want to thank you for joining this podcast today, for sharing a wide breadth of thoughts and reflections on technology, bureaucracies, warfare, personal tragedies, and of course, that wonderful call to service that you have committed yourself to, and it continues to be an inspiration for others. Trevor, thank you so much for joining Defense Disrupted.
Thank you.